All right, we're continuing in Kingdom Story. We're going to jump. We were in Matthew 13. We're going to add an E on the side of that 3 and make it an 8. So we're going to go to Matthew 18, 21. Matthew 18, 21. Make eyes with me when you get there, and then we'll... Matthew 18, 21. Parker, you there? Good. 21. All right, we're ready? Yes. You good? Good, great. 18:21. Then Peter came to Jesus and asked, Lord, how many times should I forgive my brother or sister who sins against me? Like 7 times? And Jesus answered, I tell you, not 7 times, but 77 times. Therefore, the kingdom of heaven is like a king who wanted to settle accounts with his servants. And as he began the settlement, a man who owed him 10,000 bags of gold was brought to him. Since he was not able to pay, the master ordered that he and his wife and his children and all that he had be sold to repay the debt. At this, the servant fell on his knees before him. Be patient with me, he begged. I will pay back everything. And the servant's master took pity on him, canceled his debt, and let him go. But when the servant went out, he found one of his fellow servants who owed him 100 silver coins. And he grabbed him and he began to choke him. And he said, Pay back what you owe me, he demanded. His fellow servant fell to his knees and begged him, Be patient with me and I will pay it back. But he refused. Instead, he went off and had the man thrown into prison until he could pay the debt. When the other servants saw what happened, they were outraged and went and told their master everything that had happened. And the master called the servant in and he said, You wicked servant, I canceled your debt of yours because you begged me to. Shouldn't you have had mercy on your fellow servants just as I had on you? And in anger, his master handed him over to the jailers to be tortured until he could pay back all that he owed. This is how my heavenly Father will treat each of you unless you forgive a brother or sister from your heart. Ooh. We're talking about forgiveness today, if you didn't catch the theme. It's one of those topics that you, when you read that, you're like, wow, I'm really glad I don't harbor any hatred in my heart towards anybody. I'm glad I don't have any unresolved conflicts. No, one of the most common conversations that you have when you work in ministry is people come to you with unresolved conflicts that they don't know how to deal with. It's like one of the most common things people come and talk to you about. They're like, I really wish I could just like choke slam this person into the ground. It's like the most common thing you ever are going to deal with working in ministry. And so Jesus talks about this. Jesus thinks that forgiveness is so vital to the movement of this kingdom and what he was here to do, that he reminds ourselves that we are to pray for forgiveness daily. That's part of the heartbeat of what it means to follow Jesus. That God's forgiveness of me is directly tied to my ability to release forgiveness out to others. So think about this. There's a prayer common in churches called the Lord's Prayer. Our Father, if you know it, say it with me. Our Father, who art in heaven, hallowed be thy name. Thy kingdom come, thy will be done on earth as it is in heaven. Give us this day our daily bread. And forgive us our trespasses as we forgive those who trespass against us. Interesting. It's written in the right, isn't it? Forgive ourselves as we have forgiven others that we need to forgive. Forgive us as we forgive others. It's tied right in there in this prayer that he teaches the disciples to go through. And so Peter has this question about forgiveness, and Jesus talks about it right here in this parable. This ability to forgive is taken really seriously. And so to set the stage, because we don't like to just drop into a parable and not say what's going on, Jesus is on his way to Jerusalem at this point. He's on his way in, and he's telling his disciples that he's going to not go there to kick the Romans out or to kill anybody, but he's going to go and be killed and die on behalf of Israel and the sins of Israel and the entire world. And the disciples fundamentally misunderstand Jesus. They misunderstand him entirely in this whole thing. And many times he tells them, and it doesn't work. Let's start right at the beginning of 18. Just go back to verse 1, and we're going to see just how lost these disciples are in this conversation. So in Matthew 18, it begins with them asking Jesus, what does it take to be the most important person in the entire world? So 18:1, at that time the disciples came to Jesus and said, so who is the greatest person in this kingdom of heaven of yours? And Jesus is dumbfounded. He's like, wow. Okay, so we're going here to die. I'm telling you we're going here to die. I'm telling you that I'm not going to do anything important. I'm telling you about all this stuff that the kingdom's going to look like, and you're bickering and arguing over who gets to be in charge. And so he actually doesn't even say anything to answer the question, but he grabs a kid out of the crowd that's with him, and he puts him in the middle, and he goes, "You got to be like this, like a kid." And then he ends the chapter with this really long spoken parable, but he gives us this visual image of what the greatest in the kingdom is, a child. We'll get there. What this greatest of this kingdom is. Essentially, what he's saying is, you have to reckon, what does it mean to demote myself, my own independence, and trust to be called something new, this new kind of human you're describing, to be born again, to become like a kid that has no burdens, there's nothing in between them and what's next. And so this is a community where if you've lived in this world long enough, you're going to hurt people. Sorry. Sad. You're going to do it. If you don't think you do, you have. There's a thing someone said, when you're in a text group with a bunch of friends, and there's a side group that's like the more exclusive side group where they talk. If you don't know that side group exists, I have bad news for you. You're not in that side group. But it's going to happen. There's going to be little things. You're going to have conversations on the side. People are going to hurt each other. It's going to happen. And so Jesus has this whole teaching about warning us about these character flaws that are in us and the way that we are going to hurt people and how we're to forgive when we do this. So if you look at how he sets up, before we get to this parable, before Peter puts his foot in his mouth again, Jesus warns about temptations. Like if anyone causes anyone to stumble, you might as well hang a large millstone around their neck and they be tossed into the ocean. If an eye causes you to stumble, gouge it out and throw it away. So he's warning us about all these things. Don't despise little ones. Don't look down on each other. If a man owns 100 sheep and one wanders away, shouldn't he leave the 99 to find that one? And then how to treat a believer who sins. He gives us all these things about, we're going to hurt each other. Here's how we don't do it. Here's the things that are going to cause us to stumble. So he goes through this whole teaching, and Peter comes up to Jesus and he asks him for a very practical explanation here. So what are you really wanting me to do? How many times then, Jesus, do I need to forgive a person before I can just move on with them? Let's say there's another disciple. I don't want to name anybody here. We'll just call him, we'll call him Philip. And he's kind of being, he's a little, and Peter, I've forgiven him 3 or 4 times, and I'm just wondering, because we're all in this together, how much longer till I can just kick Philip out? This is what I want to know. I'm looking for this. How many more times do I need to forgive him? If he wrongs me, how long do I have to put up with this? And so Peter goes, is it 7 times? It's 7 times, isn't it? I have to do it 7 times. He's really being generous in his mind. This is a very generous amount of forgiveness. And Jesus says, no, not 7, but 77. Or in some translations, 7 times 7 times. It just depends on how it's translated. There's a little bit of geek Bible humor happening here. Because the numbers 7 and 77 only occur next to each other 2 times in your Bible. Did you know that? 2 times. It's this story and in Genesis 4. Let's go back to Genesis 4. It's the only other time this appears. Genesis 4, way early in your Bible here. Let's keep going backwards. That's Numbers, not far enough backwards yet. Leviticus, Exodus, we're getting closer. Genesis 46, 19. Okay, 8, getting there. 2, too far. 3, 4. And does anyone want to tell me, Genesis 4, just give a peruse in there. What's the story in Genesis 4 that we're going to look at here? Cain and Abel. Interesting. A story of definitely not forgiveness. So Cain and his brother Abel. Abel presents something to God. It's considered highly favorable. And then Cain is upset by this. And instead of reconciling and forgiving, he murders his brother and is exiled. Okay, this is where we're starting in it. And so Cain, he is exiled all the way out, and he has children who have children who have children who have children. And pretty soon he has a child named Lamech. If you want to go to verse 19 in chapter 4. 19 in chapter 4. Lamech married, this is one of the descendants of Cain after he's been exiled, several generations later. Lamech marries 2 women, one named Ada and the other Zillah. Ada gave birth to Jabal, whose lived in the tents and raised livestock. His brother's name was Jubal, and his father of all who played stringed instruments and pipes. Zillah also had a son, Tulan-Cain, who forged all kinds of tools out of bronze and iron. Tulan-Cain's sister was Naamah, 23. Lamech said to his wives, Ada and Zillah, listen to me. Wives of Lamech, hear my words. I have killed a man for wounding me, a young man for injuring me. Cain is avenged 7 times. If Cain is avenged 7 times, then Lamech 77 times. So Lamech feels like he has been wronged and avenges Cain for this generational wrongdoing that's exiled them, not just 7 times, says Lamech will gain his vengeance 77 times. The only other time it appears. Lamech is, in Jewish tradition, this biblical character that becomes the epitome of human nature. He represents the absolute most horrific side of the human nature. And so Jesus alludes to this story. So you could be like Lamech if you're a vengeful person who never ever feels like you've gotten your revengeance all the way. So this is this cultural reference to 7 times 77 that Jesus is there. So Jesus is saying, forgiveness is this new sign of a different kind of humanity. We're not like Lamech anymore. That if humanity's characteristic from this Lamech story is about unbridled revenge that is never satisfied, then Jesus is alluding with the 77 that my followers are to become unbridled mercy givers with this unbelievable ability to forgive eternally. So he turns Lamech on its head. If humanity represents the inability to ever forgive and take vengeance forever, then my followers would be always merciful and never seek revenge. Turns that on its head. If you're a disciple, Jesus wants us to live as a sign of the kingdom in that way. So he tells a story about a guy who owes $1 million to a king. You probably have different translations. Mine says that hundreds of bags of gold. It could say like multiple talents. It could say 100 things. But it's a gazillion, billion, zillion dollars. Just say a gazillion, billion, zillion. Good. It's unfathomably large amount of money. You're supposed to laugh about how much he owes back. It's supposed to be ridiculous. Austin Powers, $1 million, and everyone laughs because it's really not that much, but then he says $100 billion, and everyone gets whatever. You're supposed to be like that ridiculous. It's 100 gazillion, billion, zillion dollars, and it's supposed to be a humorous amount of money. There is no way he could possibly pay it back. It's impossible to do it. But what does he say? He says, oh yeah, I can pay it back. I'll pay it back. Please, I'll do anything to pay it back. And what's the king's response? What's he going to do for this guy that owes him a gazillion, billion, zillion dollars? Okay, he erases his debt. Why? It's loaded with a ton of cultural differences here. So what happened in this time frame is that if you had a debt you couldn't pay, you were sold into debt service. So you would be sold into this debt service where you would labor, and your labor would offset what you owe. It'd be you, your family, all of your possessions, everything would go into this, and you would live on this estate, and you would work until all the money you've owed is paid off. It is impossible for him to do it. There's absolutely zero way he could work enough hours in his lifetime, or his kid's lifetime, or anyone's lifetime after him to pay this off. And the king says, you know what? It's all forgiven. It's an unbelievable act of mercy. It's unbelievable. This would have been a generational debt enslavement that this guy would have been brought into. He releases this entire debt, and this guy goes out completely free of this ginormous amount of burden that was put on him. And the first thing that he does, what is the first thing that happens to him? He runs into someone who owes him his money. He owes this guy money. And what does he do to him? He chokes him. I love it. He chokes him. I love it. It's my favorite thing. He doesn't just like say, give me my money. He chokes him. So he owes him a few $1,000s, just a couple hundred silver coins, and he chokes him. Jesus paints this picture very slowly and very carefully. The first thing that he does is he chokes him to get him the money. My image is, I have a lot of these just today, is Family Guy, where Brian owes Stewie money on a bet that he lost, and Stewie walks in and he hits Brian with a golf club. He goes, "Where's my money? Where's my money, man?" Anyway, this is what this guy's doing. He's choking him. He's like, "Where's my money?" You with me? Okay, great. The guy says to him, though, exactly what this guy had told the rich landowner. He says, I'll pay back my debt. I beg you, please. Says the exact same words that this guy owed $1 zillion to, a couple hundred here. But this guy, he refuses to release this guy from his debt, and instead he throws him into prison. I love when you read a Bible story, you can just jump over, I think, the most tiny detail that is the most key thing to understand the whole story. Did you notice the subtle contradiction between the way that the landowner acted to the guy and the way this guy acted to the guy with the tiny amount of money? Did you see the really subtle thing? So let's get the big things out of the way. One forgave, one didn't. One guy choked the guy, the other one didn't. But did you see the response? What he did? The king could have brought him in to work off his hours for a lifetime. But what does this guy do with the guy that owes him money? What does he do? He puts him in prison. If you throw someone in prison, can he work off his debt to you? No, he can't. They can't work it away. And this is Jesus' painting. This is what unforgiveness does to people, because it makes us irrational. It's this vengeful frenzy where you can't even, it stopped being about justice a long time ago for this guy. It's not about getting his money back anymore. It's not about justice. It's not about this person ever being able to say they're sorry or ever pay him back, because he doesn't even want him to be able to do it. Do you see the difference? The one said, I'll work for you. I'll pay it off, I promise. This would have been the way he could have had his money brought back. It would have been the culturally appropriate way to do it. It would have bbeen justified. But instead he throws him in prison. It doesn't make sense anymore. There's no forgiveness possible. Do you see what I mean? It's not about justice anymore. It's about revenge. Great. And you might think to yourself, that definitely doesn't describe me. And maybe it doesn't describe you all the time. But I think if you're really honest, if you've ever thought about someone who has wronged you, just keep it right there. Sometimes you don't want justice anymore. You want to feel the satisfaction of a little chokehold, don't you? You just want to if I'd just wring their neck a little bit, they'd know. They would know. We don't want justice, right? We don't actually want that. Once it becomes unbridled revenge, right? We want to feel the satisfaction of that little short little chokehold. We want to put the person in this impossible situation so that they can know what they did to me. It's not about justice. I want them to be in an impossible situation. Forgiveness is first and foremost a decision that you give up what it is by nature, even this certain right to retaliate to get the person back. It's the first thing you got to do. You got to give up your right to retaliate. That's the first step of forgiveness. It doesn't mean that there is no justice. There's none. But it does mean that there's this release of something that you could do, but you choose not to do. And that's the first step to act in forgiveness, according to Jesus in this parable. You could throw him in prison, but that makes forgiveness actually impossible. So the first step for forgiveness is to give up what you want to do, to let go of the chokehold in the prison. It means refusing to put the person in a scenario where it's impossible for them to ever make up what they did for you. And Jesus says the kingdom of God is here, and it's now, and it's becoming born again like these children, and this new kind of human, no longer this Lamecchian 77 times of vengeance. We're going to do conflict in our world, in this kingdom, differently. We're going to do it differently. We're going to give up this human nature to retaliate, and we're going to choose to change our hearts and our attitudes to take a step forward, right? So he says your decision to forgive, which is this, it's rooted deeply in God's forgiveness of you. So it's all over this parable. Christianity 101. I'm sorry. We're going to jump back. Christianity 101. Okay. Highlights here. You, me, are completely broken in ways that there's no possible way we could ever pay it back or realize. Okay? Are you with me? We're going to do a brief survey here. It's a mess we've created, and we owe gazillion, zillion, billion, zillion dollars to the creator of all the good things in this world that made human beings, that reflect his image. And I just look around at what we've done to this place. This is what the last couple weeks were about, these weeds that are popping up. And we're not tending weeds, but we've chosen to grow these weeds. And from the moment that we forget what the king has done in response to what we've done to this world, we become the second guy in this parable. Okay, this is Christianity 101. The minute that we forget the forgiveness that was given to us, we revert back to our Lamecchian ways. We have this giant debt that's been forgiven, and it's up to us to continue that forgiveness down the line. Are you with me with Christianity 101? Big debt, it's been paid. How do we react to that? So God is so committed to this good world that rather than enact the revenge he could do on us, rather than permanently give us an impossible situation and just roast this place to the ground, he comes to us in the person of Jesus, and he absorbs and he takes in all this ruin and everything that was created in this good world. He takes it all in, and he dies, and he's resurrected, and it frees us from these consequences of everything that we have built on this world. Just frees us of this giant debt. And the moment that we forget that is the moment that we begin to think like we have some higher moral ground that we can stand on than other human beings. That somehow their wronging of me is more significant than anything else. It's just a little tiny chokehold. It's just a little one, right? It's a little tiny chokehold I have the right to give to them. So this king's amazing act of mercy, right? It's not a private matter. Nor is the way that he acts with this man, right? It's not private. If he wipes the debt off the books in this parable, that has implications for everybody down the pyramid. Everyone is going to know he's been forgiven in this way. He should live differently. You see where I'm going with it? We're going to be there in a second. He wipes out the debt. Everyone down the way should also have this jubilation of forgiveness given to them. Because if his giant debt is relieved, then my debt, then my debt, then my debt, then my debt. It should just be a giant party. This is economic revolution. But it doesn't make it farther than out the door, right? Because he opens the door and he immediately encounters one of his clients with a tinier obligation, and instead of demonstrating that forgiveness, he goes back to business as usual. I'm going to punish him because I love the little tiny chokehold. Let's just let a little chokehold. He gives him no heed to a second appeal, and he fails to carry on this forgiveness that the king granted him, and it halts right there. And importantly, it mocks and it dishonors the king that forgave him. So the king, right, he can't ignore such an affront, right? He hears about what happened, and so this unforgiving man binds himself not to this king's mercy of forgiveness, but instead to this system of human unrepentant unforgiveness, of violence, of extortion and extraction, right? And so instead of turning with the king, he now binds himself to the system that he was forgiven of. And what happens to him in the end? Where does the king throw him? Right, into torture forever, right? He binds himself to the humanity instead of to the divine. So this unforgiving servant brings this judgment on himself by treating his own forgiveness as a license to execute judgment on everybody else. And so he transforms this merciful king into a vengeful judge, right at the very end. Did you see that? He goes from this very merciful king, and all of a sudden now he's a vengeful judge tossing out eternal torturing, right? So the problem lies not with the king, right? Or even with analogy, let's jump backwards a level, not with God, right? But in the world, the servant insists on constructing for himself. I have been given this unbelievable thing. I've been told to live a different way. I should pass this down the line, but I'm choosing to ignore that and create a system where I'm still in charge. And so the question is, what systems are we binding ourselves to today, right? So here's the picture that I want to really grasp on here and why I did this, okay? God's unforgivable forgiveness towards us should lead us to love our neighbors and live justice-filled lives that reflects that relationship with God. This is not a private matter. His giant forgiveness has been forgiven. It should spin down the line. Everyone is going to hear about it. So think about I'll get this sentence out and then we'll paint the picture. Unless we forgive as we've been forgiven, then we reflect the wrong picture of the person that we serve. So think about the people who run around, oh yeah, I'm a Christian. Well, you seem to live by a different, I hear you talking about how you've been greatly forgiven. I hear about how your life has been changed, but what I'm observing, what I'm seeing isn't really reflect that. And suddenly we go from having the merciful, forgiving king to this seemingly vengeful judge. It seems like he's just always smiting people. Are we creating the right picture? Are we describing God in the right way that the artist can draw the king that we serve and not the judge? Because unless we live like the forgiven servant to forgive more, we paint this picture poorly. In the kingdom is about unbridled forgiveness and not this human, vengeful tour of choking. I don't know how my brain, I'm very tired. I have a newborn at home. And there's a lot of brain happening. Are we with me? Does that make sense? I'm going to stop there. That's good. Let's pray. Great. God, this morning.